Here we are. Hello, getting ready for the webinar. I hope, as I see, participants are getting also online. I hope you are all well. So I would love to welcome you again online, since we don't have other possibilities, for instance, to see each other, to exchange, and the online format remains the only possible one. As you know, we will have today the second webinar of the series that launched Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum, as all the other museums in lockdown, actually. And of course, we don't know when we reopen. And by the way, we recently opened. We are the very young institution. And before I go to the main topic of the webinar, I would love to make a very small presentation of the institution that have launched this series of the series of this webinars. Here I share the screen because when we started the first one, I didn't make a proper presentation. So I think it's a good moment, and meanwhile, all the attendees of the webinar will gather in their countries, in their places. So we are Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum. It's the same group of professionals who work also for Tbilisi Photo Festival, but Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum is the first institution in Georgia and South Caucasus region that that focuses on contemporary image, photography, video, new media. So this is the beautiful exhibition space of the recently opened museum that we have launched in September, and we are very much missing, of course, this very beautiful and pleasant ambience to work, and we hope to get back as soon as possible, healthy and full of new ideas and initiatives that we will be, of course, sharing with our audience. And Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum has been launched on September 16th in the frame of the opening week of 10th edition of Tbilisi Photo Festival. We launched with multi-screen video installation by French artists duo Vincent Moon and Priscilla Tellman. But even before the space was ready, we featured a big and extremely important project for us by a French video artist, Christian Barani, and a group of Georgian artists, the project that tackled the consequences of Russian occupation in Georgia, that we have entitled and we came out to see once more the stars. So here are more images. And of course, we have huge plans, but for that, we need to reopen, and the world has to reopen, and all the institutions have to reopen. And we hope it will happen soon. So I see there are more attendees, and I think we can start slowly. I will now open the main presentation, and of course, yeah, I have to say that by the end of the webinar there will be Q&A, so you can ask questions, and I will give answers. At least I will try. And also, there will be, of course, recording, and the video version of the webinar will be uploaded on our social media pages, mostly museums' Facebook pages. And now I will proceed to share the screen. So it will take me, I hope, a few seconds, but I still, I'm a beginner on Zoom platform. Here it is. So I share with you, and here is the Robert Capa. Robert Capa, a Georgian journal, 1947. And as mentioned, this is the second webinar of the series launched by Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum, and I'm Nestan Nijaradze, co-founder of the Museum of Tbilisi Photography and Multimedia Museum. And I will start like it starts. And it starts this way. Wherever we had been in Russia, in Moscow, in Ukraine, in Stalingrad, the magical name of Georgia came up constantly. People who had never been there and who possibly never could go there spoke of Georgia with a kind of longing and a great admiration. They spoke of Georgians as supermen, as great drinkers, great dancers, great musicians, great workers and lovers. And they spoke of the country in the Caucasus and around the Black Sea as a kind of second heaven. Indeed, we began to believe that most Russians hoped that if they live good, very good, and virtuous lives, they will go not to heaven, but to Georgia when they die. That's how it starts, the chapter 7 of a Russian journal by John Steinbeck, an American writer and Nobel Prize, who together with Robert Capa traveled in 1947 to 3 Soviet republics, Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia. The trip lasted about 40 days between end of July and mid-September 1947. The trip of famous tour resulted in publication of the book, accompanied by images by Robert Capa. And Steinbeck dedicates, in my opinion at least, 2 most beautiful chapters of his book to the trip to Georgia. And I picked up I wanted to pick up some parts of the text, also to talk about images and to show mostly images of Georgian collection. And before I continue, I have to say that all the images you see are part of the so-called Georgian collection of Robert Capa, images of Georgian collection of Robert Capa that are preserved in International Center of Photography. As you know, ICP and Magnum Photos share the rights for Capa's archives, and there is a part of the images, prints that are in Georgia, and I will tell you later how they landed here and what's the story behind. But for me and for us, Georgians interested in photography, in literature, in foreigners traveling, foreign travelers, texts, all started with the exhibition in 2003, but we will talk about it later. And by picking up some parts of the text of John Steinbeck on Georgia, and by featuring the photos, I said to myself, it can be also like nice way to travel to Georgia one more time, especially now when we are locked down, borders are closed, and in reality we can't move farther than our places. But before they came together to Soviet Union, including Georgia, Capa and Steinbeck met in 43. Then they met again in New York, and then Steinbeck suggested to Capa he wants to return to Soviet Union to see how things have changed since his last visit in 1936, because he already has been to Soviet Union. And Capa was absolutely happy because he was looking forward to this kind of opportunity, as he was refused Soviet visa for 3 times already, and he wanted very much to go to travel and to visit and to discover Soviet Union since the period of Spanish Civil War. And so Capa suggested to Steinbeck that they go together and collaborate on a book of text and photographs. And then he, as we decided, to make an old-fashioned Don Quixote and Sancho Panza quest to ride behind the Iron Curtain and to pit our pants and lances against the windmills of today. And we would avoid politics, writes John Steinbeck, and large issues. We would stay away from the Kremlin, from military men, and from military plans. We wanted to get to the Russian people if we could. To which Capa added, we just wanted to find out how Russian people look, eat, make love, and what they talk about. And so then they discussed the idea with the New York Herald Tribune. That was absolutely happy to vote the idea immediately. And the decision to make a publication of series of long articles with photographs has been done. And now you see the original cover of the first edition of the book. And so the trip to Soviet Union and the publication of a Russian journal, both in Herald Tribune and in book form, attracted a lot of attention. And Steinbeck predicted, somehow predefined the destiny of his book. And I would like to read you the very last passage of his book, A Russian Journal, where he says, well, there it is. It's about what we went for. We found, as we had suspected, that the Russian people are people, and as with other people, that they are very nice. The ones we met had a hatred of war. They wanted the same things all people want: good lives, increased comfort, security, and peace. We know that this journal will not be satisfactory either to the ecclesiastical left nor the London right. The first will say it is anti-Russian, and the second that it is pro-Russian. Surely it is superficial, and how could it be otherwise? We have no conclusions to draw, except that Russian people are like all other people in the world. Some bad ones there are surely, but by far the greater number are very good. This is how ends a Russian journal. The book was, and in reality, the book was called The Pro-Soviet Work in United States, and it was qualified an anti-Soviet in Soviet Union. And it took as many as 40 years in the USSR to translate it into Russian and to publish it. And it only happened thanks to Perestroika period, shortly before the Soviet Union has collapsed. And today in 2020, 73 years later of Capa Steinbeck's trip to Soviet Union, the whole world, including Georgia, is under the regime of closed borders caused by the COVID-19 crisis. A situation that partly reminds the reality of Iron Curtain period, the historical period of political, military, and ideological barrier between Western world and Soviet Union. It was exactly during the Iron Curtain period that Capa Steinbeck traveled to Soviet Union. Normally, the Western citizens were denied the freedom to travel to the geographical area of Soviet Union, while Soviet citizens had strict restrictions and control on traveling traveling abroad. But of course, like the difference is that now globally the borders are closed. Globally, it's impossible to travel, and we don't know how long it will last. And of course, this webinar addresses those who would love to know more of Capa's work, including Georgian collection. I call it Georgian collection, Georgian images, as this work is not known for a wide circle of professionals and amateurs of photography. Also those who miss Georgia, who have been to Georgia and who miss Georgia. And I think this is a very elegant way to travel nowadays in this challenging reality, virtually but beautifully back to Georgia, and to see how it was perceived by very famous duo of Steinbeck, of writer and photographer John Steinbeck and Robert Capa, as well as to those who in general miss traveling. And I think this is one of these wonderful books and works that brings us back from TV travel reportages to the essence of the travel, like literature that shares the impressions of the travel. So, plus Russian journal is exactly how we would, when I say we maybe Georgians and also not Georgians, but who are already in love with Georgia, how we would love all foreigners fall under the charm of Georgia, like Capa and Steinbeck did. And then after all, I'm of the generation for whom Capa is a vivid source of inspiration, and not only in photography, but also in kind of elegance of being, in empathy for human beings, and in being just simply charming. And I have to recharge my computer. I have to put it because I see there is something wrong, so I'll be back in a second. And it goes this way. Oh. And I'm back. So there are two chapters, as mentioned before, two chapters in a Russian journal dedicated to the trip to Georgia. This is 7th and 8th chapters. Now let's try to go back to the origins of the whole story, how we got to know about the collection of Georgian images of Robert Capa. And all started by an exhibition that was held and organized in 2003, exhibition Untitled Robert Capa in Georgia, 1947. The exhibition was a result of partnership that has involved at that moment U.S. Embassy Georgia, International Center of Photography, ICP, Georgian government, private sector. So it was a cultural and artistic project that has a very, very big political importance, as it marked the strengthening of partnership between United States and Georgia. The brother of Robert Capa, Cornell Capa, was directly involved in the project. He was co-curating in the exhibition, and it's thanks to his support that this project has been implemented very successfully in a rather challenging period for Georgia, political period Georgia, as it has preceded the the Rose Revolution that took place in November 2003. And as you might know already, as a consequence of the revolution, non-violent revolution, new horizons for the democratic development of the country have opened for upcoming decades of an extremely important period in the history of contemporary history of Georgia. The exhibition has been held in Fine Art Museum, was hosted by Fine Art Museum, and I should say that it was one of these rarest photo exhibition that at that moment was featured by cultural and artistic institutions in the capital of Georgia. It was really rarest when and then to go back to the trip, John Steinbeck and Robert Capa, they had few locations to visit in Georgia, and it was Tbilisi capital, Gori as a native city of Stalin, old capital Mtskheta, and Steinbeck says that he can hardly pronounce the name of the city, village Atani nearby Mtskheta, as well as Batumi, which is like central port city on the Black Sea side, on the nearby border, southern border of Georgia, border with Turkey, as well as like small villages and settlements nearby Batumi that Steinbeck Capa visited, like Kobuleti or Chagwi, and they describe, of course, all these places more in detail in the text. And they have spent like dozens of days in Georgia, and as defined by Steinbeck, 10 days of overeating, overdrinking, overseeing in Georgia. And then, so I have another quote picked up here. It is country favored in climate, very rich in soul, and it has its own little ocean, Black Sea. He means Black Sea. Great service to the state. Great service to the state. It rewarded by a trip to Georgia. He means like Soviet workers and the tradition that existed at that period. It is a place of recuperation for people who have been long ill. And even during the war, it was a favored place for the Germans. Never got there, neither the planes nor we troops. And then talking about Georgians, Steinbeck says these Georgians are different, looking with shining teeth and long, well-formed noses and black curly hair. Nearly all the men wear mustaches, and they are handsomer than women. They are, Steinbeck says that, they are lean and energetic, and their eyes are black and sparkling. And the images, as you see, they have also attended the soccer match, more in detail described in the text, as well as traditional Georgian wrestling competition, which is kind of national sport of Georgia, and Georgians are considered to be very strong in this sport. And then he continues, they are fierce and proud, fierce and gay, and the other people of Russia have great admiration for them. They speak always of their strength and vitality and of their abilities, great cavalrymen and good fighters, they say, and the men are triumphant with the women of Russia. That's also Steinbeck who states that. And it's interesting that in these 2 chapters dedicated to Georgia, to trip over Georgia, Steinbeck regularly, often and regularly even compares Georgia to Russia, Georgians to Russia, much less to Ukrainians. He just mentions Kiev, for example, his experiences or their experiences in Korean Kiev, like 1 or 2 times within the text. But comparison with Russia and Russians are coming back regularly in the text. And they are people of poetry, of music and dancing, and according to the tradition, great lovers. And surely they live in a country favored by nature, and just as surely they have had to fight for it for 2,000 years. And as you see, I put the images from the collection from very different locations. And the book that you've for sure know, there is the images are illustrating most of the text. As I wanted to put more images, I just randomly, not really randomly, but I gave myself freedom to put them like I see the connections between text and image. And then to get back to the exhibition in 2003, because it was just the beginning, so story began with that. I have to say that for this exhibition, the Georgian images of Capa have been printed for the first time. As far as I know, they have not been printed before and shown, featured in any exhibition and public event before that date. And the exhibition was very successful, and it got, as I mentioned, like big political importance also as a cultural event. And here I have the small catalog that has been printed for the exhibition, and the president of Georgia of that time, there is a note that is part of the catalog, and he talks about, of course, importance of the project, and he talks about the incomparable artist Robert Capa. And the exhibition, as I mentioned, was co-curated by Cornell Capa, and Richard Wellen, the biographer of Robert Capa, accompanied the exhibition. He came to Tbilisi. I had the pleasure to meet him in 2003, and the big work of researches have been done for this exhibition. And as the project was successful, Cornell Capa decided to give the exhibition as a gift to Georgia. I remember even the letter of Cornell Capa where he says, I give this collection of images as a gift to Georgian people. And that's how the collection of images printed for this very exhibition in Tbilisi remained in Georgia. And now they are part of the collection of Tbilisi Bank that has sponsored the project in 2003. And so then there is a follow-up. And 11 years later, in 2014, Tbilisi Photo Festival featured part of the collection of images in the program of Tbilisi Photo Festival for the anniversary of death of Capa, and it's not all. And then in 2017, for Magnum and Capa Steinbeck's famous trip to Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia's 17 years anniversary, another project, Russian Journal Revisited by Magnum photographer Thomas Dvorak and writer Julia Strauss have been launched. As 70 years ago, Dvorak and Strauss traveled in Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine. by the end of August, beginning of September. Here you see a few images that I selected for you from the exhibition. Then that has been shown, featured in the program of Tbilisi Photo Festival 2017 in the mid-September. Here are some more images by Thomas Dvorak that have been exhibited 17 years later in Tbilisi, and so they they did the same trip. Some of the images from 3 countries. And now back again to the text, where Steinbeck speaks about people of Tbilisi and his impressions, saying that he considered them better dressed, better looking, and more full of spirit than any we saw in Russia. There was gaiety and color in the streets. The clothing was handsome, and the women wore colored kerchiefs on the heads. And the city is incredibly clean. It is the first clean Oriental city I have ever seen. So definitely Tbilisi was perceived by Steinbeck as Oriental city. Here you see 2 images of old city. This is an area just next to Bath district, kind of heart of Tbilisi, with sulfurous sources, which is the place where the city has been founded in 5th century by King Bahtang, who, while hunting, has discovered existence of the sulfurous sources of warm water. And then Steinbeck, an interesting reflection also and observation by John Steinbeck, where he says that we didn't feel stranger in Tbilisi, for Tiflis receives many visitors, and it is used to foreigners. And so we didn't stand out as much as we had in Kiev, and we felt quite at home. I had a very interesting, while preparing the webinar, I was also thinking for myself, what has changed, what hasn't changed. And I was amazed to see that a lot of things didn't change. And foreigners who were till very recent, before the lockdown, coming to Georgia, falling in love with Georgia or not falling in love with Georgia, they mostly point the same things that marked them, that impressed them, as we see and read and discover in Steinbeck's text. And here you see 2 more images from Tbilisi, the co-working space of National Library that did not change a lot, I should say. And on the right, the Pantheon of Mama Daviti, where the most brilliant Georgian personalities are buried, and shamefully there was also Stalin's mother buried there. And there are many churches in Tiflis, says Steinbeck, and he approaches like very important component that we also, even now, every time we have to present, especially Tbilisi or Georgia, we point the religious tolerance of Georgians and Georgia. And Steinbeck says the same. So there are many churches in Tiflis, and it must have been, as it is now, a city of religious toleration. I'll put it like this because I have a feeling that this small icon disturbs an image. A city of religious toleration, for there are ancient synagogues and Muslim temples, and none of them has ever been destroyed, which is absolutely true, and it is so true till now. And you see the view on the part of the old city with the mosque and with a small bridge that doesn't exist, but this is the area where till now there are Orthodox churches, there is Armenian church, there is mosque, there is a synagogue, and distance between them, walking distance is like 3 minutes, like they are very close. And this is kind of, not kind of, but this is the quintessence of Georgian identity, quintessence of related to the tolerance. And then a very interesting point for me that that I have noticed while I got to know, when I got to know the collection of these images, that Steinbeck and Capa were allowed to visit churches. Among them, Sveti Cathedral, that this image is taken, where this image is taken, as well as few following images that you will see. So the Steinbeck says that Capa took many pictures. It was amazing to see how he could move about silently and photograph without being noticed. But interesting thing is that it's like post-war politically very tense period where the pressure exercised by Communist Party in Soviet Union is very tough. Religious is forbidden. It's considered as a kind of opium for people, for nation, and believers are not freely allowed. At least are not encouraged for sure. Encouraged to go to the churches and take place. In the rituals, and it's very interesting because comparing to the existing documentation, photographic documentation of this period, there are, at least I don't know, and I have not seen any other series of photographs that documenting the rituals in the churches of this period. So for me, Capa's collection, I mean, part of the collection, this part of the collection, with the images of some rituals in Sveti Cathedral, which is central cathedral for Georgians for centuries, are rather unique. And if we take in consideration the fact that Capa Steinbeck traveled to Georgia by the end of August, in the beginning of September, the big liturgy, the ritual they are assisting, the Mass, should be the big Mass for Holy Mary, celebrated in Georgia on August 28th. And you see on the right image, you see the Patriarch of Georgia of that period. So some more images in Sveti Cathedral, in Tzcheta, ancient capital, which is about 25 kilometers from Tbilisi. So believers outside of churches as well. And then go back to Tbilisi and to impressions of John Steinbeck. He says that the summer nights were wonderful in Tbilisi. So this did not change a lot. Summer nights are still wonderful in Tbilisi. The air soft and light and dry. Now it's true with 3 weeks or more of lockdown. Before Tbilisi was a rather polluted city. Young men and girls walked aimlessly in the streets, enjoying themselves. This also, as you can imagine, isn't possible during COVID-19 crisis. Before, yes, and the customs of the young men were rather nice. Costumes of the young men were rather nice, tunics, sometimes of heavy white silk, belted at the waist, and long narrow trousers and soft black boots. They are very handsome breed, the Georgian men. And a very interesting visit to that I would love to pay attention, visit to Writer's House, now Writer's House, but in 47 it was called differently, the Union of Georgian Soviet Writers, that hosted the famous duo traveling in Georgia. And there is a very nice part in the text describing this visit and how Georgian writers prepared to host foreign guests, and there is also discussion. Very interesting discussion between them, and for example, and Steinbeck says we were not ready for that. We should maybe prepare better. And Georgian writers asking them, do Americans like poetry? And so they are they feel a little bit lost to answer, and they answer saying that only how they can judge if people love poetry or not in America is whether they buy or not. And it's true that poetry is not really very popular. People are not buying it much, and so there is the whole the discussion that follows this exchange of questions and answers. And then Steinbeck said, but to the Georgians whose love for poetry is traditional, the lack of love for poetry is almost a crime. And I remember also there is a small chapter that preceded the 7th and 8th chapters about Georgia, and the small chapter is entitled "The Legitimate Complaint" by Robert Capa. It's Robert Capa who writes, and by the end he describes Steinbeck, who apparently were preparing himself to the trip to Georgia, and Capa says he's on his bed, holding firmly a thick volume of poetry from 2,000 years ago called The Knight in the Tiger Skin. So in reality, this is the epic poem entitled The Knight in the Tiger Skin, that has been created in 12th century, not really 2,000 years ago, but 8 centuries before, and which is like the fundamental, the major piece in literature, in Georgian literature. It's an epic poem, and even not only literature, but philosophy also. So it shows that Steinbeck made real efforts before coming to Georgia. And so there's a small, there are a few images from Writer's House in Tbilisi, and then, and then there is another quote where Steinbeck talks about huge moon over the western mountains, and it made the city seem even more mysterious and old, and the great black castle on the ridge stood out in front of the moon. And if there are ghosts any place in the world, they must be here. And if there is a ghost of Queen Tamara, she must have been walking the ridge in the moonlight that night. So he prepared himself also a little bit in the history of Georgia, as he talks here about Queen Queen Tamara, and then he and as often as I said, there are comparisons between Georgians and Russians, and when Steinbeck talks about people of Georgia who seem to him or to us more relaxed than any we had seen so far, relaxed and fierce and full of joy. And perhaps this is why Russians admire them so. Perhaps this is the way they would like to be. And again, I put the images taken by from the part of the collection from Black Sea side, while Steinbeck Capa were traveling from Batumi to Kobuleti, then to small Kobuleti smaller village, and to Chakwi, and where they have been hosted by local people with a traditional Georgian supra feast. There's another image, but from the other part, it's not Black Sea side as far as I know. So we go back to this party where the guests have been introduced to the 20 guests. And so we sat down, writes Steinbeck, and here our problem began. If we did not eat, we were urged to eat. And if we did eat, our plates were replenished instantly. And this is also something that did not change since in Georgia. It's always the same tradition, as well the tradition of tamada, kind of chief of the table. And Steinbeck writes the manager, the person who invited them, drank our health and drank the health of United States. And then he appointed his best friend, table master in Georgian tamada, and this, we were told, is an old Georgian country custom that the host appoints his friend the master of speeches. It's the same tradition, and I hope it won't change. And then, so by the end of their trip, once they left Tbilisi, there was this very important episode that was somehow expected also, as both guests during whole trip were of course under the control. And tonight before they left Moscow, Capa was informed that despite earlier promises to the contrary, his negative would have to be examined before he could take them out of the country. So it was something that Capa was expecting. Meanwhile, Capa, who was exhausted with waiting for censor's verdict, was elaborating the counter-revolutionary plans for the case the films were to return, and he was afraid that he won't be able to get his negatives back, and he was worried enormously because of that. And as a last resort, he was considered even options of suicide. So Steinbeck describes this episode in the text also, and Capa repeatedly asked Steinbeck whether they would satisfy his request to behead him on the Red Square, exactly at the same site meant for this, which was previously called Lobnaya Mesta, place of execution. So it was about like 4,000 negatives from the trip that Capa had, but unfortunately the box of negatives was returned to him, but with the condition he wasn't supposed to open it before before boarding the plane. And he was told not to break the seals until after the plane had taken off from Kiev. That was the last stop in Soviet Union. On the 4-hour flight, Capa tried to estimate from weight of the books how many negatives had been confiscated, but when at least he was permitted to look inside, he was relieved to discover that nothing he considered important had been taken. And again, back to impressions from chapter 8 of a Russian journal. In this terrific Georgian, we had met more than our match. Writes Steinbeck, they could out-eat us, out-drink us, out-dance us, out-sing us. They led the fierce gaiety of the Italians. They had the fierce gaiety of Italians and the physical energy of Burgundians. Everything they did was done with flair. They were quite different from the Russians we had met. And it is easy to see why they are so admired by the citizens of the other Soviet republics. I think I would like to mention that after the publication of the book, so we said that it wasn't translated in Russian for 40 years, and the book has been published in Soviet Union shortly the collapse of Soviet Union, if I'm not wrong, in '88. And Steinbeck was criticized also for different things, but including for being for expressing so much admiration for Georgians and for Georgia in his book. There were like some critics, Russian critics, that put this element against Steinbeck. While Steinbeck continues, their energy not only survives Georgians, he speaks about Georgians, not only survives but flattens in a tropical climate, and nothing can break their individuality of their spirit. That has been tried for many centuries by invaders, by Tsarist armies, by despots, by little local nobility. Everything has struck at their spirit and nothing has succeeded in making a dent of it. There are few images, I just put one, but there are, in the collection, there are a few images of Tbilisi Bazaar that Capa Steinbeck visited, and another image with the view on Narifala fortress in Old City. And again, back to the text, we were seeing things all the time. We were having to see things all the time. For us, in a normal, inefficient kind of an existence, we'd only see things a little part of the time. And the rest of the time, we would just relax and not to look at anything. But with our limited time on this trip, we had to see something every minute, and we were getting extremely tired. And to conclude, there is another very lovely part of the text. This is a magical place, Georgia, and it becomes dreamlike the moment you have left it. And the people are magic people. It is true that they have one of the richest and most beautiful countries in the world, and they live up to it. And we understood fully now why Russians had always said to us, until you have seen Georgia, you have seen nothing. So that's the end of what I have prepared for the webinar. So it was my way to pick up parts of the text from a Russian journal, parts that focus on, that are dedicated to Georgia, and to show the images from the Georgian collection of Robert Capa, as much images as possible. And I guess there are questions, because I see seeing that there are questions, so I will, yeah, and as mentioned, there will be a video recording uploaded very soon in upcoming days on our social media channels, as well as following webinar announced in few days, as we see the interest. So we would love to unveil more and more traditions of photography in Georgia, and we are preparing a webinar on the collection of photography of 19th century, and there are some pearls to be discovered there. So now I stop sharing the screen, and I have questions that I will open now, and we'll try to see all of them. There are a lot of greetings. So hello everybody, all of you who said hello. Cette femme qui danse avec. Oh, okay, so there are, I don't see, can one view the, yeah, now I see. Congratulations, this is very nice, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And here is the question, where can one view the full collection of images? I think you can easily see them, you can easily see the images if you go on the website of Magnum Photos. You have even more on ICP website, so you can view the images there. Then, so I will go further from how do you perceive the photographs now? Are they still representing Georgia, or has it changed much? Thank you very much for this question. As I mentioned, while working on this webinar, I was also like thinking, what has changed, what did not change, and strangely, as I said, there are so many things that did not change, but. What I see in these photographs, it's much more homogeneous city. If concerning Tbilisi, Tbilisi has changed a lot after in two periods. Of course, during the Soviet period, with the plan of construction of new districts, but Capa and Steinbeck, they mostly moved in the old part of the city. So in 60s, later, after there were like big plan of construction, and then Tbilisi changed a lot after the collapse of Soviet Union. There was like the period of deconstruction, and then absolutely uncontrolled construction. So now the city is much more eclectic, much more, and in the images what we see of Tbilisi is much more pure, I would say, much more homogeneous, and of course there is this spirit of the spirit of Soviet retro aesthetics that we see in part of the images. That has, of course, disappeared. There is no traces of that anymore, except some monuments of the Soviet architecture heritage that remain. As for the people, I think in the city, of course, it changed because there were like big migrations from countryside to urban spaces. But if you go to the urban, to the countryside, you see mainly the same images, like beautiful, deep, quiet expressions as we see in Capa's wonderful photographs. Um, Hello. The question is the exhibition from 2017 available to view online at all? So it concerns the project that has been realized, implemented, launched for the 17th anniversary of Magnum and a Russian journal. So the project entitled Russian Journal Revisited by Thomas Dvorak and Julia Strauss. And you can see the images on the site of the Magnum. Easily, you type the Russian Journal Revisited and you will have images there. Dennis, and I'm looking for more questions. So there are greetings, thanks. So thank you everybody for your interest also, and greetings to everybody as well. How many pictures exist in full collection? To be honest, I don't know exactly the number. I've seen the part of the collection exhibited in Tbilisi in 2003. There were up to 60 images. Then in 2014, we exhibited smaller. We exhibited smaller parts, so there were like up to 45 images. And then while featuring in the program of the festival, the Russian Journal Revisited by Thomas Dvorak, we suggested to them to the bank that owns collection to show the old collection, so the images from 47 one more time, so the public can see the both parts, the part from 47 as the part of 2017. And we also had a great chance to invite Cynthia Young from ICP New York, who is a curator of Robert Capa, to give a public talk about Robert Capa, and it happened in 2017. So the whole collection from Russian journal, let's say the trip, is, as mentioned in the text, it's up to 4,000 negatives. And then what exactly the part on Georgia, I can't say, and as I don't want to say wrong numbers, I would avoid. Then, so another question. Value. The question is, how do contemporary Georgian photographers reflect those experiences of Georgian journal? And also, what's for you the value of this work in the general panorama of photographic works representing Georgia? I think we have to ask Georgian photographers to know how they reflect. At least for me, it's an important, very important photographic work, because it's by Robert Capa and it's Georgia. So it's related for me, fundamental photographer working in my country. And so creating the photographic body of work in the period, which is Soviet period, so post-war period, where photography is used as a simple tool of propaganda. So we had now a webinar, first webinar, mostly focusing on the Soviet period of photography and the ways it was used, as we were talking about free spirits of Georgian Soviet photography. But this period photography is very poor because all the imagery created is is politically correct. So it was supposed, and the only aim it had, to show the most powerful country, the most powerful, with most powerful factories, and to serve, and the photography as other arts was serving the propaganda. So suddenly having in this reality a body of work that shows without any propaganda the life and its different aspects and people and different cities of that period, plus signed by Robert Capa, it has an incredibly huge importance, not only for me as like one of the experts of photography in Georgia, but for all the, like for ensemble of visual culture and visual heritage of Georgia. So I always underline this. And then we have to ask how Georgian photographers see this and reflect this on this work. As for yeah, a value, and so, and I talked about the value. I have recently seen a book dummy by Alex Salt, a project aiming to find the most beautiful Georgian woman, Nestan. I'm pretty sure I saw you in the book. Yeah, it's true. I was working also, I had the pleasure to work on this big project, which is Georgian Spring by Magnum Photographers. Alex Salt was one of the photographers, and I followed him in Pankisi Gorge while he was looking for the most beautiful woman in Georgia. And by the way, he found this woman, but he wasn't allowed to photograph her. And that's the story that he told in his part of Georgian Spring. Would you do a webinar regarding the project as well? But to be honest, I'm thinking about this. So you are in my you read my thoughts. Maybe with Alex Sot online as well. We have to ask Alex, Alec, and with a pleasure from my part, it will be with a pleasure. So I think we have to discuss it together. So thank you for the question. Is there a print version of collection of Tbilisi Bank that exhibited? It is possible to have it. Is the print version, you mean the catalog? If you mean the catalog or any book, there is only this small publication from 2003 that has, that gathers images and few texts, including text by Richard Wallen, the biographer of Robert Capa, as well as Thomas Nadroshvili, and there are the texts are, it's a bilingual publication, and there are also quotes from the texts. So this is only one. And it would be a very good idea to think about publishing a book with this collection. And another questions, are there any plans for the exhibition? As I mentioned, there was one exhibition in 2003. There was another exhibition in 2013. There was a third exhibition in 2017, where we exhibited 47 so Capa's images, as well as Thomas Dvorak's images. So there were like these three exhibitions. I would go more for profound, like for more profound researchers on the collection, collaboration with ICP, International Center of Photography, to plan and to imagine like new ways of exploring the collection of and of making it to imagining the events that can popularize more this collection. It can be the book publication, etc. So the most important thing is to have material, and then to imagine events or ideas or projects. It's easier. Is it still possible to buy the catalog of the exhibition of Capa pictures in 2003? If so, where? I would like to write a proposal to you. How can I contact you? I don't think it is possible to buy a catalog now. I guess it was published in a limited quantity and 17 years ago. So I have only my copy, and I'm happy to have it because there are interesting parts that serve always while I work on the topic. So I don't think so. I don't think so. You can buy now this catalog. It's better to publish something new, and so you can get a chance to buy it then. Hello, first of all, thank you for the interesting presentation. Thank you. My question is regarding censorship. As you mentioned at the end, do you know whether Steinbeck and Capa were accompanied by a team, maybe consisting of translator, local guide, and official censor? Yes, sure. The Chmarsky, who was the translator, and I guess not only, as it was like big tradition, because it's a post-war period, it's a Iron Curtain period, all the foreigners are perceived with suspicion. So of course the Communist Party wasn't supposed to leave Capa and Steinbeck without being accompanied. So they had the translator who followed them, and he comes back in the text regularly. Sometimes it's very funny. For example, now just by chance, I have the book opened. It's in Capa's Legitimate Complaint by Robert Capa, a small chapter that I mentioned already, and that precedes the 7th and 8th chapter in the book, where Capa says, for example, I leave you, gentle American readers, and have to assure your Russian counterpart that everything that Mr. Chmarsky will write about us in Pravda was the major daily newspaper of Communist Party, is absolutely true. So Chmarsky is sometimes very tough with them, but sometimes he is nicer. And there are, I really recommend you to read the book. So that's how you can also prepare yourself for the future trip to Georgia. But because I'm sure these images and the texts and the admiration Capa Steinbeck have for Georgia can inspire you to plan your trip once we get out from COVID-19 crisis. And that will be also a nice way to celebrate the end of the crisis, to come to Georgia. So you can read different parts about Chmarsky. For example, I just turned the page and there is another passage about Chmarsky. So he was following the duo everywhere. And then I think it's the last question. In the same year, in Capa's book, named Slightly Out of Focus, is published. Do you have in Georgian translation of it published in Georgian? No, I don't have it, and because as far as I know, the Georgian translation doesn't exist, and this is another good idea of a project to translate it. And there is another question: are there any reflections from Georgian host of that visit? No, at least I didn't cross this thing. So there are, then I would say there are not, but maybe there are some, and I just don't know. I can't pretend to be a specialist of the Russian journal, even if it's one of my favorite books, because, as I said, Robert Capa is one of my big inspirations. And in the beginning, I mentioned that he was refused 3 times the Soviet visa, and once Steinbeck went to Soviet consulate to New York, he was asked by the consul, but we're very happy that you are planning your visit to Soviet Union, but why do you need to bring a photographer with you? We have photographers in Soviet Union. And Steinbeck said, I don't think you have someone like Capa. I think there is another question. More about the translator, Chmarsky, C.H. Marsky, and Capa was, while kidding, he was calling he Chmarxist, and how he's mentioned in their book. I would love to read the Russian journal sometime in preparation of a future visit. Yeah, I think it's a very good way to prepare your visit to Georgia, and hope soon we will start moving. But before we are stuck in front of our screens, for me it was a way to give you an opportunity to travel to Georgia despite closed borders, to travel throughout the images of Robert Capa and text of John Steinbeck. And oh, sorry, there is another question. When did you Georgian photography experts first hear or learn about Robert Capa? I can't say for Georgian photography experts, but Robert Capa, I mean, I know Robert Capa since I got interested in photography very long time ago. We have for the first time in 2003, we saw the printed images from the Georgian part of collection of Robert Capa. So that was the point. And then did Capa work or interact with Georgian photographers? We have no information about it. We don't know about it. If there are not more questions, I wouldn't take more of your online time. I would love to thank you one more time for your interest, for attending this webinar. And as mentioned, we plan to continue the series of webinars, and following one will be dedicated to the beautiful collections of Georgian photography from 19th century. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.